Welcome to There is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell. I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I'm the owner of Maxwell's fitness programs, and I've been in business since 1994. The purpose of this podcast is to get to the real deal of what really works, and most importantly, why things work. Today, I'm going to talk about progress. What is the next progression? Before I get to that, let me thank Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They are committed to providing the highest level of customer service in home sales, and they have the reviews and the sales to back that up. So give them a shout, 386-451-2412. All right, so we're in it to make progress, right? When we go to the gym, when we work out, we want to get better. And better is a kind of a subjective word, right? No, it's a very subjective word. So what do we want to get better at? One of the things I really enjoy doing as a trainer, and I was talking to a client about this the other day. I mean, there are things like every job that we like, that we dislike, that we maybe love. A couple things I love to do. So I love to create workouts. Like, to me, that's like really fun to sit down and use my creative brain because I see myself as a creative. I've always been pretty creative, and I like that. I'm not really taking credit for that. I just happen to have that kind of brain that likes to go in that direction. So creating workouts really satisfies me in that regard. Like, I don't like just doing, the old, let's just do this because everybody does that. I mean, number one, that's not the most effective way to train somebody. And number two, that would bore the heck out of me. So I like to create things. But the point of this podcast today is progression. And that's the second thing I really, really love doing about the job, is designing. So it's kind of the same thing as creating a workout, but designing the next progression. After 10 or 12 workouts, or maybe 20 to 24, somewhere in there, I get a really good feel of what somebody needs. I already know their goals going in because we've had a good conversation. But after training them for a little bit, or even if one of the trainers other than me is training somebody, I still have a really good idea, either through their feedback or watching myself. But I know where the person needs to make progress. And not everybody is the same. This is where I tease one of my clients sometimes, or they'll tease me. They'll say something like, hey, did you see that on Instagram? And it's kind of a running joke because they know how that kind of training methodology kind of gets under my skin. Meaning, somebody sees somebody doing something on Instagram and they automatically think this is what they should be doing. And of course, most influencers on Instagram look good, right? So then the message, which is false, but the message given is, well, I look good because I do this, which of course isn't true, right? I mean, I hope everybody knows that. And I think deep in the old cortex of the brain, we know that, but then we get kind of sidetracked with the old lizard brain, right? The brainstem, the automatic emotions that kind of trick us into thinking that, oh, this must be why they look good, which of course is their whole objective of their advertisement. They're selling something. So the opposite of that, which is why you listen to the Method to the Madness, which is why I've been doing this for so long, because I actually do enjoy it. The opposite of that is knowing what you need to do and what progression is best for you. So when I say progression, I'm meaning progressive overload, right? I mean, I hope everybody knows by now that we don't get better unless we do something more than we've done before. But what is that something? Is it the same for everybody? Well, of course not. That something is going to depend on two things. Number one, what is your goal? And number two, what do you need? So you might already be doing what the goal says you should do, but maybe you've got a weakness or a liability somewhere else that a good trainer can catch, or you can catch yourself. So, for example, different ways we overload is going to be, the most obvious is increased load. So you use heavier weights. That is absolutely what we have to do if we want to get stronger. Another way to overload, probably the next most common, or maybe it's as common as load because they kind of go together, is increased reps. So doing more repetitions. That's absolutely a necessity if you want to improve your muscular endurance. If you want bigger muscles, it usually comes down to doing a combination of reps and load. You really need more intensity. But those aren't the only two ways that we can progress or overload. I mean, there's also more sets, which means more volume. Now, if somebody kind of flies through their workout without much thought and they get done a little too fast because they're really not paying enough attention, I mean, that's got a couple problems. One of them is the fact they probably should pay attention more, but they might need a little more volume. But other non-common ways of progression should be more common. But range of motion, like for some people, it's not a matter of continuing to increase the load and the reps, especially if they don't have very good range of motion that's correctable. Some range of motion isn't correctable. Like there's just too much scar tissue. Your flexibility is just genetically a little too poor. I mean, everything can get better, but there is a point where you're just not going to improve it a whole lot in some cases. But in other cases, you can. And the reason why it's not getting improved is because you're focusing more on increasing your load, usually, and sometimes the reps, versus increasing your range of motion. All right. So let's use myself as an example. So I tend to be more of a mesomorph. That's my body type. So I can put on muscle a little easier. And that's not a bad thing for me because that's one of my goals. I like to have more hypertrophy, more muscle. So that's good. I would hope to think that if I couldn't, I would still strive for it. I don't know that. Don't have to know that. Out of my control. So it doesn't matter. But the fact is that I can put on muscle, fairly easy because I'm mesomorphic and I have more fast twitch muscle fiber. But I don't necessarily want my quadriceps to get much bigger because they kind of are overdeveloped compared to my hamstrings anyway. And if I do a 5K or something like that, bigger quadriceps actually slow me down a little bit. So for me, I don't really need to hypertrophy. But what I could use is greater range of motion because bigger, stronger quads tend to be less flexible quads. So I don't just sit there and push the reps and the load. I push the range of motion and I really focus on getting into a deeper squat, keeping my back up, keeping my spine straight. So that is a progression for me. Get it? Everybody's a little different. I spoke to a client the other day. He's new. He's working on some back issues, trying to get stronger. And I told him that, outside of the normal progressions, like adding reps and adding loads, one thing we like to do with somebody who's had different injuries, back injuries, whatever, is to do more advanced motions, causing more stress on that area, but progressive overload so we don't overstress it. So an example of that would be from going from seated rotary movements to standing movements. Yes, that right there is a progression because now you have to support your spine without the luxury of a chair supporting it. Before you get all riled up and get your panties in a wad saying, well, I do a lot of seated exercises. That's okay. Remember, everything has its purpose. I'm talking about for somebody, especially with the spine, because you can't baby it forever. There comes a point where you got to stand up, do some exercises where you're forcing your core to engage. So we do that in a progressive manner. So we do from primarily seated exercises into standing exercises, which forces that person to stabilize their spine without the aid of a backrest, right? So that is a progression. So it doesn't always have to be increase the load. And oftentimes when we overload by changing that, you don't want the person to go up and stand up because that's a double progression. And if you've listened to this show, you know that I'm not big on double progression. So that's another way. Another way is going from what we call bilateral exercise, so doing both limbs, both arms, into isolateral exercises. Again, that's a progression, especially when you are doing them at the same time, meaning that when you're alternating the reps, especially on upper body, you're forcing your spine to hold itself in place. You're forcing your obliques to do some work. And actually, you don't even have to alternate. If you just did a standing curl, a standing dumbbell curl with one arm and did the reps, you're actually forcing the opposing side oblique muscle to get stronger because it's holding you in place because your body wants to rotate and the muscles are keeping you from rotating if you're paying attention. And then obviously you switch hands and you do the other side. So that is another progression. Now, I'll give you one more progression and I'll leave it with that. And I do it last because I want to make sure that not everybody does it. So another progression is going from a stable surface to an unstable surface. So for example, going from a regular squat to a Bosu ball squat. Now, that's great if you need it. Sometimes it's a finisher at the end of a workout and that's all well and good. But sometimes people really need it and sometimes people don't need it. And that's the old Instagram thing that drives me nuts. So someone will see somebody on a Bosu doing squats and they'll think, oh, wow, I need to do that to make progress. Oh, really? What's your goal? Well, my goal is to get big thighs. Okay, then you don't need to do the Bosu. Because if you're focused on an unstable surface, you can't do the reps and the load required to get big thighs. Get it? So like doing one is going to take away from the other. Now, if you're working on balance in doing a squat, then the Bosu ball is great. So if you feel like you've gotten stronger, but your balance is still not where you want it, then progressing to something like that is going to be very beneficial. So anytime we go to an unstable surface, or if you've injured your ankle before and you need to force your stability muscles to get stronger, then standing on a Bosu ball doing the exercises is a wise choice. Or if you are in a sport that requires balance like surfing or skateboarding or things like that, doing squats on a Bosu makes absolute sense. When you want maximal hypertrophy, doing squats on a Bosu makes zero sense. All right. So we have to know what we want and what we need. And that's how we choose the appropriate progression. Okay. So there is a method to the madness. When we trainers, us qualified trainers, because I'm sure you listened to the last podcast where I talked about what makes somebody qualified and not qualified and why we need more qualified trainers. Qualified trainers know what they're doing. They know what progression you need, and they're making that progression or teaching you how to make that progression. Okay? Now, I think you probably need to progress to a better garage door because there's no better garage door company in Volusia County than Overhead Door of Daytona Beach. Jeff and Zach Hawk are the owners. Man, they are the best people around. They will treat you right. They will treat you fair. They will get you what you need. So please give them a shout at Overhead Door, Daytona.com. Please share this show to your social media. Text it to your friends. And please download because it helps my numbers. All right? I would appreciate it. I'm simply asking. Until next time, be Max Fit, be Maxwell. Have a great weekend.